Chapter 32. Those people. That was the phrase the man playing chess had used to describe the murder of Mason Kyle's family 30-some-odd years before. Michael tossed 3 20s on the table, and all 5 of us made our way out the door. Mel! Shane tried to sidestep the man with the graying hair. Melody! It's all right, Echo. The man told the girl Shane had addressed as Melody. Speak your truth. A girl I almost recognized, the way I'd almost recognized Shane, stepped forward. Her eyes were on the ground. I'm not Melody anymore, she said, her voice light and wispy, barely more than a whisper. I don't want to be Melody. My second name, my true name, is Echo. She lifted her eyes to her brother's. I'm happy now. Can't you be happy for me? Happy for you? Shane repeated, his voice catching in his throat. Mel, you can't even talk to me without glancing at him to make sure what you're saying is okay. You gave up college, Melody, to join the soul-sucking cult that stole our mother away from us when we were kids. Shane's fingers curled into fists. So no, I can't be happy for you. Your mother was lost. The man in charge addressed those words to Shane, his manner almost gentle. We attempted to provide solace, offer her a simpler way of life. I was as grieved as you were when she chose a different path. You're the reason she left town! Shane exploded. His opponent's demeanor never wavered. Serenity Ranch is not for everyone. We cannot help everyone, but those we can help, we do. He glanced at Melody, so subtly that if I hadn't been looking for it, I wouldn't have noticed. I found my serenity, Melody recited, her voice expressionless, her eyes glassy. In serenity, I've found balance. In serenity, I've found peace. Are you on something? Shane demanded before whipping back around to the man he'd confronted. What did you give her? What have you been giving her? The man stared at and into Shane for a moment or two, and then bowed his head. We must be going. We're about 3 seconds away from Draco Malfoy over there throwing a punch, Michael said, his voice low. 3, 2... Shane punched the man. As the cult leader wiped blood off his lip with the back of his hand, he looked at Shane and smiled. It didn't take Agent Sterling long to dig up information on Serenity Ranch. The man in charge was named Holland Darby. He'd been investigated by local authorities dozens of times going back more than 30 years, but no proof of wrongdoing had ever been established. The earliest complaints dated to the establishment of the Serenity Ranch commune on the outskirts of Gaither more than 3 decades earlier. According to the files Agent Sterling had acquired, Holland Darby was a collector of drifters and strays, but over the years, he'd wooed more than a few young, impressionable locals to his side, too. Never anyone under the age of 18. Never any males. That told me what I needed to know about Holland Darby. You dot your I's and cross your T's. If you harbored minors, you could run afoul of the law. And whatever you're doing out at Serenity Ranch, the last thing you want is cops on your property. Your followers include both men and women, but when it comes to locals, you prefer females. The younger, the better, so long as they're legal. He brought Melody to town as a test. Leah's tone gave no clue to the fact that this was personal to her. That Holland Darby had raised memories she kept buried deep. Darby wanted Shane to see his sister. He wanted Melody to make it clear that they are her family now. The less contact Melody has with her family, the easier she is to manipulate. But the more time she looks them in the eyes and chooses you, the more certain she'll be that they won't forgive her. That they can't forgive her, and that even if she wanted to leave Serenity Ranch, she could never go home. Clearly, Leah said, standing up, the Gaither Hotel is only passingly familiar with proper air conditioning. She pulled her hair back and off her neck. I'm going to change into something cooler. Leah's expression dared us to argue that her need for a wardrobe change had nothing to do with the temperature. Beside me, Michael watched her walk away. No matter how good she was at hiding her emotions, he was better at reading them. He knows what you're feeling. You know that he knows. After another moment, Michael followed her into the bedroom. I could see exactly how this was going to play out. The push and pull between them, Michael trying to bring her emotions to the surface, Leah throwing the fiasco with Celine in his face. I believe, Sloane said, filling the silence, that there is approximately an 87% chance that Michael and Leah will end up making out or otherwise engaged in acts of physical... Let's turn our attention back to the case, Agent Sterling cut in. Shall we? She fell into lecture mode. There were dozens of complaints filed about Serenity Ranch when Holland Darby first began buying up large chunks of property on the outskirts of town 33 years ago. If I had to guess, I'd say that most of the complaints were baseless or manufactured. No one wanted drifters, runaways, and former drug addicts taking up residence on what used to be family farms. Agent Sterling set those complaints aside and opened the thickest file. Approximately 9 months after the establishment of Serenity Ranch, the local sheriff's department opened up an investigation of the group's involvement in the murders of Anna and Todd Kyle. Nightshade's parents? I asked. Sterling nodded. For the next hour, she, Dean, Sloane, and I pieced through every bit of evidence the investigation had managed to obtain. It wasn't much. At the time of the murders, Anna and Todd Kyle were a young married couple with a 9-year-old son. Anna's father, Malcolm Lowell, lived with them. Reading between the lines, I inferred that Malcolm was the one with money, the one who'd owned the house, the one who'd refused to sell his land to Holland Darby when the interloper was buying up all of their neighbors. There had been some kind of altercation involving the two men. Words were exchanged. Threats were implied. And that night, someone had broken into Malcolm Lowell's house, butchered his daughter and son-in-law, and viciously attacked Malcolm, stabbing him 17 times and leaving him to bleed out on the floor. According to the police report, 9-year-old Mason had been home the whole time. Did you hear them screaming? Did you hide? The old woman at the diner had said that most people in Gaither believed that Mason Kyle had seen his parents murdered, but the report gave no such indication. Malcolm, Nightshade's grandfather, was the one who had called 911. By the time medical assistance had arrived, he had been holding on to his life by a thread. The old man survived. His daughter and son-in-law had not. In the aftermath of the attack, Malcolm Lowell had been unable to provide a physical description of his attacker, but suspicion had fallen almost immediately on the occupants of Serenity Ranch. I've been working on a timeline. Sloane had made use of the hotel's complimentary notepad, ripping out page after page and laying them along the floor, scrawling a note on each. She pointed to the leftmost one. 33 years ago, Holland Darby establishes his commune on the outskirts of town. Less than a year after that, Anna and Todd Kyle are murdered. 27 years ago, the poison master, who would eventually go on to choose Nightshade as his apprentice, killed 9 people, completing his initiation into the master's ranks. I followed the logic of Sloane's calculation. Nightshade had completed his initiation kills 6 years earlier. The cult operated on a 21-year cycle. Ergo, the poison master before Nightshade had been initiated 2 to 3 years after Anna and Todd Kyle had been murdered. What's the connection? Scenario 1, I said. The master who eventually trained Nightshade as his apprentice lived in Gaither during the time of the murders. We know the masters favor Pythias who have violence and abuse in their past. It's possible a similar criteria is used in the selection of killers. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the logic take hold. The previous master knew what Mason had seen and survived and marked him for recruitment. Dean met my gaze. Scenario 2. I'm the master who recruited Nightshade. I'm also the person who killed Anna and Todd Kyle. I was never caught, and the case got just enough local press to attract the attention of the masters, who offered to channel my potential into so much more. He ran the tips of the fingers on his right hand over my left. I accepted the offer and learned to kill without a trace, without mercy. Beside me, Sloane shivered. Years later, Dean continued quietly, when it was time for me to choose an apprentice of my own, I remembered Mason Kyle. Maybe I didn't realize he was in the house when I killed his family, or maybe, he continued, his voice nothing like his own, I chose to let him live. Either way, he's mine. Silence fell over the room. If Nightshade's parents had been murdered by one of the masters, solving the Kyle murders might lead us straight to the person who'd recruited Nightshade. Find one master, follow the trail. Scenario 3. Agent Sterling, who had been remarkably quiet as Dean and I had sorted through our thoughts, added her voice to the mix. The unsub in the Kyle murders killed Nightshade's parents, so that little Mason Kyle would be more suited to becoming a killer himself someday. She stood up and began pacing the room. I'd never seen her so intent. I know the Nightshade case inside and out. The killer we were looking for was brilliant, narcissistic, with a need to win and to one-up all competitors. And yet, during his last interrogation, Nightshade accepted that the Pythia was going to have him killed. He didn't fight it. He didn't turn on the other masters to save himself. He was loyal, I translated. You think that loyalty might date back to childhood? Dean lifted his gaze to Sterling's. You think our unsub started grooming Nightshade to join the masters when he was just a boy. Sloane frowned. Nightshade's parents were killed 1,887 days before Nightshade's master completed his own initiation kills, she pointed out. Barring anomalies in the space-time continuum, it seems unlikely that someone could have begun grooming an apprentice to take their place before that someone had a place. Sloane's hands fluttered, a sure sign of anxiety. She calmed herself, turning to the remainder of the timeline. 9 years after Mason Kyle's parents were murdered, Mason left Gaither and never came back. That puts his exodus at roughly 24 years ago. About 12 years after that, Cassie and her mother moved to town. Sloane's blue eyes darted toward mine. I could see her trying to calculate the odds that continuing would hurt me. I saved her the trouble. 6 years after my mom and I left Gaither, Nightshade killed 9 people, taking his seat at the master's table. Less than 2 months after that, my mother was taken. My mom and Nightshade had lived in this town more than a decade apart, but one or more of the masters must have kept tabs on them thereafter. You have a long memory. You have an eye for potential. And you can be very, very patient. Assuming the attack on the Kyle family was perpetrated by someone aged 16 or over, Sloane said, we're looking for an unsub no younger than his late 40s, and possibly substantially older. I thought of the senior citizens back at the diner, the old man who'd invited us into the apothecary museum. We need to know what the police didn't put in the official file, Dean said. Gossip, theories. Luckily for you, Leah commented, strolling back into the room. Gossip is one of my specialties. She was wearing a long black skirt and a multi-layered top that hung off her shoulders. She'd rimmed her eyes in thick, dark liner and wore 2-inch-wide copper bangles on her wrists. On a scale of 1 to 10, she said. How psychic do I look?
6.4,
Sloane replied without hesitation. Psychic? I asked. I was fairly certain I did not want to know where this was going. Leah and I were talking about our little chat with Ree at the Nada Diner, Michael said, coming up behind Leah with a look on his face that made me think they'd been doing a lot more than talking. And we both seemed to recall Ree saying something about a widow with a big mouth and a penchant for psychics. Leah arched an eyebrow at me. I knew that eyebrow arch. It did not bode well.
No way,
I said.
I spent most of my childhood helping my mom con people into thinking she was psychic. I'm not going to help you do the same.
Sloane looked at me, looked at Leah, then looked at me again. There is a very high probability, she whispered, that Leah's about to tell you that you're lying. Chapter 33. It could be worse, I told myself as I adjusted the camera pin on my lapel and Leah leaned forward to ring the town gossip's doorbell. Leah could have chosen a more destructive outlet for her issues.
Can I help you?
The woman who answered the door was in her early 50s, with vivid red hair that wouldn't have looked natural even if she were 2 decades younger. Her sense of fashion tended towards skin-tight and shiny. You wear bright pink lipstick, even in your own home. The house is classic, understated. Everything you're not. If you're Marcella Waite, I believe that we can help you, Leah murmured. Even a natural liar's credibility could only take us so far. As much as I loathed doing it, I picked up the slack. My name is Cassie Hobbs. You knew my mother, Lorelei. She helped you connect to loved ones on the other side. Recognition sparked in Marcella's eyes.
44% of psychics believe in UFOs,
Sloane blurted out.
But twice that believe in extraterrestrials.
The spirit realm speaks to Sloane in numbers, Leah said solemnly.
You have 4 dogs buried in your yard.
Sloane rocked back on her heels.
And you replaced 479 shingles on your roof last year.
Marcella's hand flew to her chest. Clearly, it had not and would not occur to her that Sloane was simply good at math and extremely observant.
Do you have a message for me?
Marcella asked, her eyes alight. My mother passed away several years ago, I said, sticking to the story we'd told Ree. I came to Gaither to scatter her ashes, but before I do... Yes, Marcella said breathlessly. Her spirit asked me to come here and do a reading for you. I was a horrible person. As Marcella Waite served us tea and sat down across from me in her formal sitting room, I pushed down a stab of guilt and forced myself to focus on her BPE instead. Behavior, personality, environment. This was your husband's house. He came from money. You didn't. He never pressured you to change, and you haven't. But you also haven't altered his decor. My gut said that she'd loved him. You're a very spiritual person, I said, feeling more like my mother than I had in a very long time. I'm sensing that you have a touch of the gift yourself. Most people liked to consider themselves intuitive, and 90% of this job was telling the client what they wanted to hear. You've been having dreams, I continued. Tell me about them. As our hostess launched into a description of her dream from the night before, I wondered how my mother could have done this for so many years. You did what you had to do, I thought. You did it for me. But deep down, I also had to admit, you liked playing the game. You liked the power. It took me a moment to realize that Marcella had stopped talking. There are 2 sides to the dream you've described, I said automatically. The different sides represent 2 paths. a decision you have to make. The trick to my mother's trade had always been to stay vague until the client gave you cues about how to proceed. New versus old, I continued. To forgive or not to forgive. To apologize or to bite your tongue. There was no reaction from Marcella, so I got a bit more personal. You wonder what your husband would want you to do. That opened the floodgates. His sister has been so nasty to me. It's pretty rich, the way she looks down on me when she's on marriage number 4. Your husband's sister never thought you were good enough for him, and she let you know it from day one. Sloane cleared her throat. There are 56 anagrams of the name Marcella, including caramel, a calmer, and lace arm. Marcella gasped. Caramel was my Harold's favorite candy. Her brow furrowed. Harold wants me to be calmer? More patient with his sister? Leah took that as her cue. I smell caramel, she said, her eyes focusing on something in the distance. Harold is here. He's with us. She latched onto my hand as she turned her weighty gaze to Marcella Waite. He wants you to know that he knows how his sister can be. He didn't always see it when he was alive, I added, elaborating on Leah's statement to make it more consistent with my profile of Marcella. But he sees everything now. He knows it's hard, but he's counting on you to be the bigger person, because he knows you can be. He said that? Marcella asked softly. He doesn't say much, I replied. In spirit form, he doesn't have to. Marcella closed her eyes and bowed her head. You needed to hear that he supports you. You needed to remember that he loved you, too. I could almost believe that we were doing a good thing here, but then Leah arched her back, her body contorting itself into an unnatural position. Help! Leah pitched her voice into a high, nails-on-chalkboard whisper. I can't find my son! There's blood! So much blood! I gave Leah's hand a warning squeeze. This wasn't how I would have chosen to bring the conversation around to the Kyle murders, but Leah, in true Leah fashion, hadn't left me much of a choice. I forced myself not to roll my eyes. Tell me your name, Spirit, I said. Anna, Leah hissed. My name was Anna. Chapter 34. Luckily for us, Marcella Waite, like most gossips and lovers of gold lame leggings, had a finely tuned sense of melodrama. I was fairly certain she'd enjoyed Leah's performance even more than talking to her dead husband. It must have been Anna Kyle, Marcella told us, tapping red fingernails against the side of her teacup. I was 19 when she and her husband were murdered. That poor woman. What happened? I asked. We'd put on our show. Now it was time for the town gossip to put on hers. Anna Kyle was stabbed to death in her own kitchen, the husband, too, Marcella said in a hushed voice, and Anna's daddy barely made it out alive. And her son? I asked. She said she couldn't find her son. He was there, Marcella told us. Saw the whole thing. That echoed the sentiment we'd heard at the diner, but contradicted the official report that Agent Sterling had dug up. You ask me, there was something not quite right with that boy. He was a rowdy one, always running around with the children of those people. I filed the reference to those people away for future consideration. How awful, Leah murmured. It's a miracle the killer left the boy alive. Marcella pursed her lips. Even without Michael present to read her, I recognized the look of a woman on the verge of saying something that she knew she shouldn't. I don't hold with gossip, mind you, Marcella hedged,
But some folks say that little Mason knew the killer. Some folks think he didn't just witness the murders." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "They think he watched." Sloane frowned. "Why would anyone think that?" Marcella didn't even try to resist answering. "I told you about Anna's daddy. He was stabbed over and over, had to have surgery, and when he woke up, he told the police he never saw the attacker." "But," Leah prompted. "But after that, Malcolm Lowell refused to have anything to do with his grandson. He wouldn't take custody of his own flesh and blood, couldn't even look at him. Old Malcolm never spoke a word to the boy again." I could see how this would play out in a small town, how it had played out for Nightshade. At first, people felt sorry for you. But after your grandfather woke up, after he insisted to the police that he hadn't seen his attacker, people started asking questions. What if he was lying? What if he was protecting someone? What if that someone was you? "What happened to Mason?" Sloane asked, her hands worrying at each other in her lap. "His parents died. His family didn't want him. Where did he go?" The question struck close to home for Sloane. "A local couple took the Kyle boy in," Marcella said, taking another sip of her tea. "Hannah and Walter Thanes." "Do they still live in Gaither?" Leah asked casually. Marcella set her teacup down on the tray. "Hannah passed away several years ago, but Walter is still local. He runs the Apothecary Museum down on Main Street." You know better than to enjoy the quiet moments. You know better than to watch Laurel sleeping and think, even for a moment, that she's just a child. She looks peaceful, doesn't she? Five's voice is like oil on your skin. He's holding the knife. What are you doing here? It pays sometimes to be haughty, to remind the sadists that you may be at their mercy, but they're at your mercy too. I had some interesting news from an old friend. You don't take the bait. Five smiles at your silence. It appears the FBI has made an appearance in Gaither. He drags one finger over the edge of his knife blade, lightly, carefully. You give him a dead-eyed stare. What the FBI is or is not doing is none of my concern. It is, Five replied, pressing the knife blade into the tip of his own finger and drawing blood. When it involves your daughter. Chapter 35. The others met us outside the Apothecary Museum. Sterling's conflicted about letting us on the front lines. Judd has that look on his face that he gets when he's thinking about Scarlet, and Agent Starmans desperately has to go to the bathroom. Michael murmured to Leah and me, in case you were wondering. I glanced over at Agent Starmans, who quickly excused himself to use the facilities inside. Judd reached into his back pocket, pulled out his worn leather wallet, and handed Sloane a rumpled $20 bill. "Donation," he told her, "for the museum." As Sloane closed her hand around the bill, I let my eyes meet Agent Sterling's. You hate that I'm the one who has a plausible reason to be asking questions. You hate that people in Gaither will talk to me. But more than anything, you hate that you don't hate putting us in the line of fire nearly as much as you should. Dean reached for the door to the museum, then held it open for Sterling. "After you," he said, a gesture an onlooker would have taken for Southern chivalry, but that I recognized as an unspoken promise. We'd follow her lead. Sterling entered first, the rest of us on her heels. Afternoon, folks. Walter Thanes stood behind the counter, looking as much a relic as anything housed in these walls. Sloane held out the bill Judd had given her. Thanes nodded to a wooden box on the counter. As Sloane slipped the money into the box, I forced myself to turn away from the man who'd raised Nightshade and perused the shelves. Hundreds of bottles with faded labels lined one wall. Rusted tools sat on proud display in front of beakers made of cloudy glass. On the counter beneath them, there was a thick, leather-bound book, the pages yellowed and the ink faded with age. As I took in the handwritten title scrawled across the top, my heart stilled in my chest. Poison Register, 1897. I thought of Nightshade, of the poison he'd used to kill Scarlett Hawkins. Undetectable, incurable, painful. I pushed down a shutter as a presence beside me cast a shadow over the page. To buy medicines that could prove poisonous, patrons were required by the apothecary to sign for them. Walter Thanes ran the tip of his finger lightly over the entries on the register. Laudanum, arsenic, belladonna. I forced my attention from the open page to the old man. Thanes smiled softly. The line between medicine and poison was quite thin, you know. That line appeals to you. Immediately, my brain went into overdrive. You find poisons enthralling. You took Nightshade in when he was just a boy. Was the museum an actual apothecary at some point? Agent Sterling asked, pulling our suspect's attention away from me. Thanes clasped his hands in front of his body as he crossed the room toward her. Oh, yes. My grandfather ran Gaither's apothecary as a young man. A dying art, Sterling murmured. Even then. Those words registered with Thanes. He liked her, liked talking to her. Quite a brood you have here, he commented. My niece and her friends, Sterling replied smoothly. Cassie and her mother lived here when Cassie was young. When I heard the whole group was planning a trip to Gaither, I thought they could do with some adult supervision. Leah sidled up beside me, giving every appearance of being entranced by an old-fashioned scale, the exact color and texture of a rusted penny. Fun fact, the deception detector said under her breath. The part about adult supervision was true. Behind us, Thanes processed Agent Sterling's statement. I suppose that would make you Lorelei's sister. Hearing my mother's name on his lips had a visceral effect on me. I wanted to turn to face him, but my feet were cemented to the ground. You knew my mother. Do you have any children? Agent Sterling asked, the question completely natural and completely benign on her tongue. I made my way along the outside wall, turning so that I could sneak a look at the old man's reaction. Anger, Michael murmured, coming up behind me and speaking directly into my ear. Bitterness, longing. He was quiet for a moment. And guilt. The fact that Michael mentioned guilt last told me that it was the faintest of the three. Because it's faded over the years? I wondered. Or because you're constitutionally incapable of feeling more than the slightest twinge. I had a boy. The old man's answer to Sterling's question was clipped and gruff. Mason took off when he was about 17. It just about broke my wife's heart. A glance at Leah told me that she hadn't detected a single lie in those words. Mason, I repeated, doing my best impression of a curious teenager. I let myself hesitate, then said, Some people were talking at Ree's this morning. I averted my gaze, tentative enough to suggest that I knew better than to say what I was about to say. About the murders of Anna and Todd Kyle. Cassie, my aunt said sharply, reinforcing the idea that I was a kid who'd just crossed a line. It was a horrible thing.
Thanes closed his fingers around an old-fashioned bottle marked with a skull.
I never cared for Anna's father. He married a local girl, but never made much of an effort with folks here in town. His wife died when Anna was 6 or so, and he raised that little girl alone in his big house on the hill. Too good for this town from day one.
He shook his head, as if trying to clear it of memories.
Malcolm flat out ignored the rest of us, but he clashed with Holland Darby and his followers. That never turns out well for anyone in these parts.
I cast a glance at Agent Sterling, as if I were debating whether or not it was worth the risk to stop biting my tongue. Anna and Todd Kyle were murdered, and their son, Mason. The old man stared at me for a moment.
My wife and I couldn't have children. It seemed like the Christian thing to do. And Mason...
Thanes closed his eyes.
Mason was a good boy.
Based on the way this conversation had unfolded, I could see two possible versions of Walter Thanes. One was an old man who'd tried to do his best by a damaged boy who'd thanked him by taking off as soon as he was old enough to shake the Gaither dust off his feet. The other was an incredible actor, one whose grief had less to do with the boy who'd left town, and more to do with the man Mason Kyle had become. Nightshade had failed the Masters. Nightshade had gotten caught. Nightshade had become a liability. The sound of a bell tore me from my thoughts as the front door to the museum opened. Instinctively, I turned away, busying myself with another shelf of relics.
Walter?
The voice that greeted Thanes was smooth and pleasantly pitched, non-confrontational.
Darby.
Thanes offered little more than a clipped greeting in return.
Can I help you with something?
Darby, I thought, suddenly glad that I'd turned away. As in Holland Darby?
I understand Shane had a run-in with my father.
Those calmly spoken words filled in the blanks. The speaker wasn't the older Darby. It was, apparently, his son.
I was hoping to have a word with the boy. I'm sure Shane would be grateful for your concern, Doctor,
Thanes said, in a tone that suggested the opposite.
But I gave him the afternoon off, told him to get his act together before he comes back here.
The response from Darby's son was measured.
I would hate to see Shane prosecuted for assault, and we both know that my father is capable of baiting him into a confrontation and then pressing charges.
There was another long silence, and then Walter Thanes abruptly changed the subject.
These folks were asking questions about Mason, about what happened to Anna and Todd Kyle. Maybe I'm not the one they should be asking.
I remembered what Marcella Waite had said about Mason Kyle running around with the children of those people. You were friends with Mason Kyle. My brain went full speed as I turned to get a better look at the man. Agent Sterling stepped forward, drawing his attention before his gaze could land on me. This Darby had his father's dark hair, but thicker and without any trace of gray. His eyes were alight, nearly see-through blue. I put him somewhere in the neighborhood of his early 40s, none of which explained the way my fingernails dug into the palms of my hands the second I saw him. A heavy weight settled in the pit of my stomach. My mouth went dry, and suddenly I wasn't standing in the museum. I was hanging onto a rope swing, watching as a younger version of the same man laughed and swung my mom up onto the porch railing. She was laughing, too. I came out of the memory in time to register the man's introduction.
Kane Darby,
he said, holding out a hand to Agent Sterling.
I'm a local physician, and as you've probably gathered, my father is not beloved in these parts.
Kane. My brain latched onto the name. I heard my mom saying it. I saw her standing in the moonlight, her hand woven through his.
You were asking about Mason Kyle?
Kane continued, so even and calm that I knew he had a natural bedside manner.
We were childhood playmates, though we had little contact after his parents' murder.
I should have looked at Leah for some indication of whether or not Kane Darby was telling the truth. I should have thrown myself into profiling the man. But I didn't. I couldn't. Feeling like the walls were closing in, I pushed past Leah, past Michael, past Dean, the world blurring until I made it out the door. Chapter 36. My mother had never been the type of woman to fall head over heels. She'd gotten involved with my father when she was a teenager, longing to escape her abusive father's household. But when she'd found out she was pregnant, she'd run, not just from her father, but also from mine. All I could think, as Dean followed me outside, Leah, Michael, and Sloane on his heels, was that Kane Darby had held my mother's hand. He'd danced with her in the moonlight. He'd made her smile. "Your mama always did have an eye for good-looking men." Rhee's words echoed in my head. Then again, she also had an eye for trouble. I tried to remember something, anything else about my mother's relationship with the cult leader's son, but came up empty. My time in Gaither was a black hole. Viewing that memory loss with a profiler's eye, I asked the obvious question. What is my subconscious trying so hard to forget? I crossed the street. Vaguely, I was aware that the others stuck close to me, that Agent Starmans had reappeared and was trailing a discreet distance behind us. "I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that Kane Darby has daddy issues." Michael did me the favor of not commenting on my emotions. The good doctor really was as calm as he seemed, right up until the point where he mentioned his father. "What about Mason Kyle?" I asked. "What did Kane Darby feel when he heard Nightshade's name?" "Sometimes one emotion can mask another." Michael paused. "What I got off the good doctor was a combination of anger, guilt, and dread. Whatever else might have been buried underneath, that particular cocktail of emotions is something Kane Darby has felt before. Those three emotions are intertwined for him, and when they arrive all at once. Anger that someone else has all of the power and you have none." Leah strolled ahead of the rest of us, turning to walk backward, light on her toes. "Guilt because you've been conditioned to believe that there is no greater sin than disloyal thoughts." She turned back around. "And dread," she finished softly, her face hidden from view. "Because you know, deep down, that you will be punished." "You're not talking about Kane Darby." "In other words," Michael translated, acting as if Leah hadn't just shown us a glimpse of her deepest scars. "The good doctor has daddy issues." Like Leah, Kane Darby had been raised in a cult. Based on the fact that he'd spoken negatively about his father, I assumed that, like Leah, he'd gotten out. But you didn't leave town. You didn't cut all ties. You didn't start anew. "Kane Darby and my mother were involved," I admitted. Leah had been honest. The least I owed the group was the same. "I don't remember much, but from what I've been able to piece together..." I closed my eyes, picturing the look on my mother's face, my throat tightening around the words. "She might have loved him." There was a beat of silence, and then Sloane picked up the conversational slack. "Counting the bellman at the front desk and various casual encounters, we've spoken with 12 Gaither citizens in the past 3 hours. And of everyone we've spoken to or observed, there's only one person we've identified as having a close relationship of some sort with both Nightshade and Cassie's mother." Kane Darby. I willed myself to remember something else about him, any interaction I'd had with him as a child, no matter how small. "Darby the younger would have been all of 10 years old when Nightshade's parents were murdered," Dean commented. "And I was 9, Leah countered lightly, "when I killed Man Dead. Children are capable of horrible things, Dean. You know that." Sometimes, I thought, seeing the world through Leah's eyes, you have to become the monster to survive. I thought of Laurel, held captive alongside my mother, of Kane Darby, growing up under his father's thumb, of Nightshade, whose parents had been murdered in their own home. And then I thought about the holes in my own memory, how much of what I'd thought I knew about my own childhood had turned out to be a lie. "We need more info on Kane Darby," I said, my stomach flipping as a plan solidified in my mind. "And I think I know how to get it." You should have known that it would come to this, that Cassie would remember. The wheel turns, the die is cast. It is only a matter of time before the masters ask you to pass judgment. You showed no weakness when Five told you of your daughter's arrival in Gaither, no hint that his words had hit their target. But in the hours since, you felt the shift coming, felt yourself on the verge of becoming someone else, something else. When the acolyte, no longer an apprentice, not yet a master, comes to present his work for your approval, to add a diamond to the collection around your neck, you're ready. This one is young. This one wants your admiration. This one you can use. You listen, you nudge, you lay a hand lightly on the flesh of his chest, tracing a symbol, 7 circles around a cross. You whisper in the acolyte's ear. You are powerful, you murmur. You will be the best among them if you choose your targets well. You offer immortality if he is worthy, if he will do as you say. Lorelei would shudder at your words, at your plan. But Lorelei isn't here anymore. Cassie doesn't need Lorelei. She needs the Pythia. She needs the monster. She needs you. Chapter 37. When Agent Sterling caught up to us, she sent everyone back to the hotel but Dean and me. I told her what I wanted to do. She made me lay out the pros and cons. She made me walk through it again and again. She listened to my arguments, and finally, she agreed. The 3 of us would go back to the quaint blue house where I'd spent a year of my childhood. Barring any unforeseen complications, I would see if the current occupant would let me poke around inside. With luck, we might knock loose a few memories. Eventually, Agent Sterling might have to blow her cover and approach Kane Darby as an FBI agent. Eventually, we could directly interrogate him about Nightshade and my mother. But for now, we needed to know who we were dealing with, and that information was locked in my mind. "I'd tell you that you don't have to do this," Dean murmured as the house came into view. "But I know that you do." Less than a year ago, I'd gone with Dean to his childhood home. I'd knelt in the dirt with him, searching for his mother's initials on a weather-worn picket fence. At the time, it hadn't even occurred to me that someday he might be returning the favor. "Maybe we should have brought Townsend with us." Dean's comment got an eyebrow arch out of me. "So he could make inappropriate comments and lighten the moment? Or so he could tell you exactly what I'm feeling?" Dean considered his answer very carefully. "The one that's not going to get me a speech about how you can take care of yourself." I snorted and walked toward the front porch. As I made my way up the steps, the second one creaked. "Gotcha!" I jump from the step onto the porch and wrap my arms around Mommy before the creaking can give me away. On the contrary, Mommy picks me up and dangles me upside down. "I've got you." Cassie. Dean's voice broke through the memory. At first, I thought he was worried about me. But as I processed my surroundings, I realized that he was more concerned with the person who'd just opened the front door.
Shane,
I said, taking in Rhee's grandson's appearance. Somehow, I hadn't expected the house to be occupied.
I don't know if you remember me, but I used to live here.
Shane stared at me with every bit as much disdain as we'd gotten from him at the museum.
So I'd like to look around a little, I returned. I don't know how much your grandmother told you.
Before I could finish that thought, Shane headed back into the house. He let the door slam behind him, but didn't lock it. I took that as an invitation and reached for the doorknob. When Shane realized I'd followed him into the house, he stared at me for a moment.
You didn't used to be this brave. You didn't used to be so antisocial, I countered.
Shane snorted.
You know what they say, Red. Dance it off.
Hearing my mother's words come out of his mouth hit me like a jolt of electricity. This was real. My mom and I hadn't just lived here. We'd put down roots. We'd had people in our lives. We'd had something to miss when we hit the road.
You want to look around?
Shane said, his surly tone softening ever so slightly.
Far be it from me to stop you. I just live here.
Wordlessly, I took Shane up on his invitation and began making my way through the house. Entryway, kitchen, small spiral staircase. I knew before I took the first step that at the top of the stairs, I'd find 2 bedrooms. When I came to stand in the doorway of the room that had been my mother's, another memory hit me with the force of a tidal wave. Nightmare. It's dark. I want my mom, but Mommy isn't alone.
I don't deserve you.
Mommy has her back toward Kane. I told you about the kind of man my father is. I didn't tell you that I have a younger sister. I left her in that hellhole, and I never looked back. I rub at the corners of my eyes. Sister? Mommy doesn't have a sister. Just me. It's just Mommy and Kane and me. I shift. The floor creaks beneath me. They turn. The rest of the memory was less vivid. I didn't feel it, didn't live through it again, but I knew what had happened. Knew that my mother and Kane had turned to see me, that Kane had been the one to bend down to my level, to pick me up. I knew that he'd told my mother that he was the one who didn't deserve her, didn't deserve us.
You okay?
I wasn't sure how long Dean had been standing behind me, but I let my body lean back into his. I let myself feel his warmth, the way my mother had felt Kane's. I knew that Kane and my mom were involved, I said, the words like sandpaper in my throat. I didn't realize that he was part of my life, too. Kane Darby and my mother hadn't just been involved. They'd been serious. If you were serious about him, I thought, picturing my mom the way she'd looked in the memory. If he was serious about us, why did we leave? As I descended the spiral staircase, my stomach twisted. I felt the way I did every time I dreamed about my mother's dressing room. Don't go in there. Don't open the door. My gaze locked on the foot of the stairs. My heart raced, but a memory never came. I just stood there until I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. I made a beeline for the noise, but Agent Sterling cut me off. She gave me a warning look and then led the way into the kitchen herself. Shane was standing over the sink, blood dripping from his hand, a broken glass on the floor. Blood. Go back to sleep, baby, my mother's voice whispered from somewhere in my memory. It's just a dream.
Have an accident?
Agent Sterling asked Shane. Shane ignored Sterling and narrowed his eyes at me.
You shouldn't have come back here, Little Red.
Watch it. Dean's voice was low and full of warning. Shane ignored him.
The last thing Gaither needs is outsiders buying into what Serenity Ranch is selling. You should tell your little friend that, he continued,
his voice dripping with venom. "If you see her again." For a moment, I felt like I was watching this interaction from outside my body. "What, little friend?" I asked. Shane didn't answer. He grabbed a paper towel, pressed it onto his bleeding hand, then tried to storm past us. Agent Sterling stopped him. For the first time since we'd come to Gaither, she took out her badge. "I'm with the FBI," she said, "and you need to back up and explain exactly what you meant just now." Shane looked from Sterling's badge to me and then back again. "Holland Darby is on the FBI's radar?" It was clear from the tone of Shane's voice that he was trying very hard not to get his hopes up. Agent Sterling let Shane's explanation stand. "What about the girl who was with you?" Shane asked. "Is she FBI too? Is that why I just got a call from a buddy of mine that she's out there asking to join them?" The girl who was with you. I'd had a plan to find out more about Kane Darby, but apparently I wasn't the only one. All roads in Gaither led back to the friendly neighborhood cult, and it didn't take much profiling for me to figure out which of my fellow naturals might have decided to follow up on that lead. On her own. Chapter 38. Serenity Ranch was less of a ranch than a compound, surrounded by a 10-foot-tall fence on all sides. Agent Sterling parked her car outside the main gate. "Stay here," she told us. Clearly, she wasn't thinking straight. Leah was the closest thing to family that Dean had. Before he could latch his hand around the door handle, I reached out to stop him. "I know," I said. "Leah did something stupid, and you weren't there to stop her. And now she's in there playing a very dangerous game with very dangerous people. But you need to calm down, because you saw the way that Darby was with Shane. He wanted Shane to take a swing, and he'll want the same thing from you." Power, control, manipulation. This was the language that Holland Darby spoke. It was a language that Dean and I knew all too well. Dean's entire body was tense, but he forced himself to breathe in and breathe out. "Leah was 7 when her mother joined a religious commune," he said, his voice rough in his throat. "Leah's mom was in this country illegally, and after what she'd been through, the man in charge seemed like a savior." Dean closed his eyes. To Leah, he was something else. I thought of Leah, learning to recognize deception. Leah, learning to lie. "Leah likes high places," Dean continued softly, "because her mother let a man like Holland Darby stick Leah in a hole in the ground for days at a time. Because 6-year-old Leah didn't have a humble spirit. Because she wouldn't take forgiveness when it was offered. Because she didn't repent her sins." Dean forced himself to stop, but my mind was reeling at the implications. As a child, Leah had gotten locked into a battle of wills with a man who dealt in power, manipulation, and control. The kind of man who benevolently offered forgiveness, so long as you accepted that your salvation was his to give. From the moment Leah had seen those people in town, from the moment she'd read about Serenity Ranch, she was a ticking time bomb. Power, control, manipulation. Leah had known that approaching Holland Darby as tourists wouldn't work. Approaching him as the FBI would only cause him to close ranks. But approaching him as a lost soul in need of redemption? You'll play his game better than he does. You'll find out what he's hiding. And if it costs you, whatever it costs you, so be it. I'm not going to take a swing at anyone. Dean did his best to look like he wasn't on the verge of letting his darkest self come out to play. But I'm also not staying in the car. Good, I replied as the cult leader approached the gate where Agent Sterling stood. Because neither am I. Chapter 39. How may I help you? Holland Darby's voice was pleasant and smooth, more powerful and magnetic than his son's. Agent Sterling didn't so much as glance at Dean and me as we came to stand behind her. "I'm here for Leah," she said. Her tone wasn't argumentative. She was simply stating a fact. "Of that, I have no doubt," Darby replied. "Leah is a very special young lady. May I ask what your relationship to her is?" On either side of the gate, Holland, Darby, and Agent Sterling stood with their arms hanging loosely by their sides. Both of them were preternaturally calm. "I'm her legal guardian." Agent Sterling went for the jugular. "And she's a minor." If there was one thing that we knew about Holland Darby, it was that he took pains to stay just this side of the law. The word minor was his kryptonite, and Agent Sterling knew it. You would hate to part with such a prize, but if she's not 18... "I haven't been a minor for 3 months. Leah came to stand behind the cult leader. She was dressed in a white peasant top and flowy white pants, barefoot, her hair loose and free. "Leah." Dean didn't say more than her name, but there was a wealth of warning in that single word. "I'm sorry," Leah told Dean softly. "I know this hurts you. I know that you want to make it all better, to make everything better. But there is no better, Dean, not for someone like me." A masterful liar wove truth into deception. Leah could say the words "someone like me" and mean them. "I believe there is a better." Holland Darby took the opening that Leah had left him. "For everyone, Leah. Even you." Even you. Those 2 words belied the gentleness in his tone. He was already undermining her, already sowing the belief that she was less, that she was unworthy, but that he could believe in her despite her unforgivable flaws. For a brief instant, Leah's eyes met mine. "You know exactly what you're doing," I thought. "He's a doll maker who likes broken toys, and you know how to play the shattered, broken doll." Agent Sterling almost certainly saw that as clearly as I did, but she had no interest whatsoever in allowing one of her charges to play this game. "Leah, you have 2 choices. The first is to get your ass out here in the next 5 seconds. And the second choice?" Agent Sterling took a single step forward. "It's one that you're really not going to like." Leah, being Leah, heard the truth in that statement. I expected her to bait Agent Sterling further, but instead she shrank back. Vulnerable, broken, weak. Holland Darby held up a hand. "I will have to ask you to moderate your tone." He stepped in front of Leah, blocking her bodily from Sterling's view. "This is a simple place, and we abide by simple rules. Respect, serenity, acceptance." Agent Sterling stared the man down for a moment, and then she reached for her back pocket. For her badge, I realized. Dean's hand caught Sterling's before she could pull it out. He looked toward Leah, who stepped tentatively out from behind Darby, every motion, every gesture of vulnerability a lie. "I hope you find what you're looking for," Dean told Leah. There was anger in those words, but also a message. He was telling her that he saw through her act, that he knew why she was here, and he knew that it had nothing to do with finding serenity, and everything to do with finding out what Holland Darby was hiding. Leah smiled sadly before retreating behind Darby's form. "I hope so, too."